The air in my apartment had a particular kind of cold. It wasn't the sharp, clean cold of a winter morning, but a damp, penetrating chill that seeped through the window frames and settled deep in my bones. It was the cold of neglect, of things left unfixed for too long. My landlord, a man who communicated exclusively through stained, typewritten notes slipped under the door, had ignored my last 3 requests to look at the building's ancient boiler. So, I wore 2 sweaters indoors and drank my coffee faster than I wanted to, just to steal a few moments of its fading warmth. My life had become a series of these small, tactical maneuvers against a pervasive sense of being stuck. Each morning, I walked the 6 blocks to the daily grind, the coffee shop where I worked. The job was fine. It paid just enough to cover rent and cheap groceries, and it demanded little of me beyond a practiced smile and the ability to remember the difference between a macchiato and a cortado. The routine was its own kind of insulation against the bigger, more frightening questions about my future. For 8 hours a day, I was just Leo, the guy who made the coffee. It was a role I could play without much effort. There was one part of the routine, however, that felt different. At precisely 8:15, Julian Croft would walk through the door. He was older, maybe by 20 years, with silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his usual serious expression let on. He owned half the commercial properties on this street, including the building that housed the coffee shop, yet he never carried himself with the arrogance I associated with wealth. He was just steady, a quiet, solid presence in a world that felt increasingly flimsy. He always ordered the same thing: a large black coffee. No sugar, no cream. He'd wait patiently by the counter, his gaze often drifting to the window, watching the town wake up. But sometimes, I'd feel the weight of his attention on me. It wasn't invasive or judgmental. It was just a look, an observation. And in those moments, the air in my lungs would feel a little too thick, my hands a little too clumsy, as I snapped the lid onto his cup. I kept a small, smooth stone in my pocket, a gray river rock I'd picked up on a rare day trip to the coast 2 years ago. When I felt that familiar churn of anxiety or loneliness, I'd rub my thumb over its surface. It was a stupid, small thing, but it was mine. A tangible piece of a day when I had felt something like peace. I found myself reaching for it often when Julian was in the shop, a secret anchor against the quiet pull of his gravity. One Tuesday, the cold in my apartment finally won. The ancient radiator in my living room gave a final, wheezing gasp and fell silent. The temperature inside dropped to match the biting wind outside. I spent the night buried under every blanket I owned, my breath pluming in the air. The next morning at work, I was exhausted, my fingers stiff and slow. My coworker, Sarah, a perpetually cheerful college student, took one look at me and frowned. "You look frozen, Leo. Everything okay?" I tried for a casual shrug, but my shoulders felt tight and sore. Heater finally gave up the ghost. My landlord's about as responsive as a brick wall. I was complaining to her, but my eyes flickered, almost involuntarily, toward the door. It was 8:14. As if on cue, the bell chimed and Julian Croft stepped inside, bringing a swirl of frigid air with him. He unwound a dark gray scarf from his neck, his movements economical and precise. He joined the short line, and I turned my attention back to the espresso machine, my face suddenly warm. I could feel him standing there, a few feet away. I could feel his quiet regard. When he reached the counter, he gave me a small nod. "Morning, Leo. Large black coffee, please." His voice was low and calm, a contrast to the frantic hissing of the steam wand. "Morning, Mr. Croft," I said, my own voice sounding thinner than usual. I worked, my hands moving through the familiar motions, but my mind was elsewhere. It was on the silence in my apartment, the deep, unrelenting cold. As I handed him the cup, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, a fleeting contact, but the warmth of his skin was a shock against my icy fingers. It sent a strange jolt up my arm. He didn't pull away immediately. His gaze held mine for a second longer than necessary. "I overheard you," he said, his voice softer now, meant only for me. "About your heat." I felt a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I didn't want his pity. I didn't want to be a project. "It's fine. I'll figure it out." He considered me for a moment, his expression unreadable. He wasn't looking at me like a landlord or a wealthy patron. He was just looking at me. "I might have a solution," he said slowly, as if weighing each word. It's not a handout. It's a job. If you're interested, I blinked, surprised. A job? My father passed away last year, he explained, his eyes briefly losing their focus. He was a collector of books. His library is extensive. I need someone to help me sort and catalog them. It's weeks of work, maybe more. It pays well. Well enough to get your heat fixed, and then some. The offer hung in the air between us, clean and direct. It was an opportunity, presented without pressure. It was a lifeline, disguised as a simple contract. He was giving me a choice, a way to solve my own problem with my own labor. He was offering dignity. Yes. I heard myself say, the word coming out before I had fully processed it. Yes, I'm interested. A flicker of something I couldn't name crossed his face. Relief? Satisfaction? Good, he said. He pulled a pen from his coat pocket and wrote a number and an address on a napkin. My cell. Call me this afternoon, and we can discuss the details. You can start tomorrow, if you like. He placed the napkin on the counter, his fingers resting on it for a beat before he withdrew. Stay warm, Leo, and then he was gone. I stared at the napkin, at the strong, clean lines of his handwriting. The air still felt cold, but something inside me had shifted. A small, locked door had just been offered a key. That afternoon, I called him. His voice was the same over the phone, calm, steady, reassuring. We agreed on an hourly rate that made my head spin and a start time of 9 the next morning. He gave me directions to his house, which was on the other side of town, up on a wooded hill that overlooked the valley. The next day, I took the bus as far as it would go and walked the last half-mile up a winding private road. The houses here weren't just houses. They were estates, set back from the road behind stone walls and old-growth trees. Julian's house was the last one on the lane. It wasn't a modern glass palace, but a solid, two-story stone structure that looked like it had grown out of the landscape. It looked like him. Grounded. Permanent. I stood at the heavy oak door for a long moment, my breath misting in the cold air. I smoothed down my worn jacket, suddenly conscious of how out of place I must look. I felt like a boy playing dress-up in a world I didn't belong to. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the bell. The door opened almost immediately. Julian stood there, not in the tailored coat he wore to the coffee shop, but in a soft, dark green sweater and jeans. He looked younger, more relaxed. He also looked large, taller and broader in his own space than he did in the bustling cafe. Leo, you're right on time, he said, and his smile was small but genuine. It reached his eyes. Come in. I stepped inside, and the warmth that hit me was instantaneous and enveloping. It smelled of old wood, beeswax, and something else, the faint, clean scent of his cologne, a subtle note of cedar and bergamot. The foyer was spacious and quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Let me take your coat, he said, and his hands were gentle as he helped me out of my jacket. For a moment, his fingers brushed the back of my neck, and that same jolt from the day before shot through me, warmer this time. He hung my coat on a wooden rack next to his own, and the sight of my threadbare jacket next to his expensive wool coat was a stark reminder of the chasm between our lives. He seemed to notice my hesitation. The library is this way, he said, his voice soft, drawing my attention away from my own insecurities. Can I get you some coffee first? I made a fresh pot. Yes, please, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He led me through a wide hallway into a kitchen that was both modern and cozy, with darkwood cabinets, stainless steel appliances, and a large farmhouse table in the center. He moved with a quiet competence, getting a mug from a cabinet, pouring the coffee. He didn't fill the silence with idle chatter. He just let it be, a comfortable quiet that put me at ease. He handed me the mug, his fingers wrapping around it for a second to steady it in my hands. His hands were large and capable, with clean, short nails and a network of fine lines on the knuckles. They were hands that looked like they knew how to fix things. Thank you, I said, cradling the mug. The ceramic was warm, and the heat seeped into my palms, a welcome sensation. He leaned against the counter, sipping his own coffee, and studied me for a moment. His gaze wasn't intimidating. It was assessing, but in a gentle way. The job is straightforward, but it's a lot of work. Thousands of books. My father never threw anything away. He gestured for me to follow him. Come, I'll show you. The library was at the back of the house. He pushed open a pair of tall, paneled doors, and I stopped in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. The room was 2 stories high, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lining every wall, accessible by a rolling ladder. A fireplace with a stone hearth dominated one wall, and 2 worn leather armchairs were situated in front of it. The air smelled richly of paper, leather, and dust. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen. Books were everywhere, stacked on tables, overflowing from shelves, piled in corners. It was organized chaos. "This is it," Julian said from beside me. "The task is to get everything onto the shelves in a logical order. We'll start by sorting them by subject, then alphabetically by author. I've got a laptop and a barcode scanner set up for you to create a digital catalog as you go." He walked over to a large mahogany desk and gestured to the equipment. It was all brand new, top of the line. He had spared no expense to make the job efficient. "It seems monumental," I said, still taking in the scale of it all. "It is," he agreed. "But we'll do it one box, one shelf at a time. I'll be working in my study just down the hall most days. If you need anything, and I mean anything at all, just come and get me. There's no such thing as a stupid question." He turned to face me, and the space between us felt smaller now, charged with the quiet energy of the room. "The most important thing, Leo, is that you feel comfortable here. This is a workplace for you. My house, but your workspace. The boundaries are yours to set." The statement was so direct, so considerate, that it took me a moment to process. He was acknowledging the inherent awkwardness of the situation, the power imbalance, and actively working to neutralize it. He was giving me control. I met his steady gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Croft." A small line appeared between his brows. "Julian," he corrected gently. "My name is Julian." "Julian," I repeated, the name feeling unfamiliar, but right on my tongue. "Okay," a short nod. "Okay." And so, my new routine began. Each morning, I would arrive at the quiet stone house, and Julian would have a fresh pot of coffee waiting. We'd exchange a few words in the kitchen, our conversations circling around the weather, or a book I'd cataloged the day before, or the progress on the library. The talk was simple, but it started to build a fragile bridge between us. I spent my days surrounded by the comforting scent of old paper. I lost myself in the work, in the satisfying task of bringing order to chaos. I'd climb the rolling ladder, my body humming with the physical effort, and run my fingers over the spines of books that had been untouched for years. It was peaceful, meditative work. Julian was true to his word. He left me alone, but he was always present. I'd hear the soft tap of his keyboard from his study, or the quiet sound of him moving around in the kitchen at lunchtime. He never checked up on me. He trusted me to do the work, and that trust was a quiet gift. Around noon, he would appear at the library door. "Time for a break," he'd say, not as a command, but as a gentle suggestion. He always made lunch for both of us. Simple things, thick sandwiches with fresh bread, or a hearty soup he'd made the night before. We'd eat at the big farmhouse table in the kitchen, the silence between us growing more comfortable with each passing day. During those lunches, I started to see the man behind the quiet exterior. I learned that he had taken over his family's property management business after his father's health declined. I learned that he had a dry, understated sense of humor that would appear in a quick, wry comment that made me smile. I learned that he listened. He would ask me about my day, about the books I was sorting, and he would actually listen to my answers, his eyes focused on me, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a very long time. I, in turn, found myself observing him, collecting small details like treasures. The way he'd push his glasses up the bridge of his nose when he was reading something intently. The way his hand would rest on the back of his neck when he was thinking. The low, rumbling sound of his laugh when I said something unexpectedly funny. I started to analyze his every gesture, every word, searching for a meaning that probably wasn't there. When he handed me a book and his fingers lingered against mine, was it an accident? When he stood a little too close as we looked at a shelf together, the warmth of his body seeping through my shirt, was he aware of it? My mind became a catalog of these tiny moments. I was terrified of misreading the signals, of projecting my own growing feelings onto his simple acts of kindness. He was my employer. He was a wealthy, established man, and I was me. A 20-something barista with a broken heater and a life that felt like it was on pause. The gulf between us felt immense, and yet, in the quiet sanctuary of his house, it sometimes felt like it disappeared entirely. One afternoon, I was on the top rung of the ladder, trying to place a heavy encyclopedia on the highest shelf. I stretched, my fingers just brushing the empty space. I shifted my weight, reaching a little further, and the ladder wobbled beneath me. A small gasp escaped my lips. Before I could even process the fear, Julian was there. He moved faster than I'd ever seen him move. One of his hands clamped onto the side of the ladder, steadying it instantly. His other hand came to rest firmly on my lower back, a solid, grounding pressure. "Easy," he said, his voice a low murmur right behind me. "I've got you." My heart was hammering against my ribs. I could feel the heat of his palm through my t-shirt, a steady, reassuring warmth that spread through my entire body. I was acutely aware of his proximity, of the scent of his cologne, of the solid presence of him just inches away. I leaned back slightly, instinctively, into his touch. "Thank you," I breathed out, my voice shaky. "Don't mention it," he said. His hand didn't move. It stayed there, a silent promise of support. "Let me get that for you." "It's too awkward from that angle." I carefully handed the heavy book down to him, our hands brushing again. This time, the contact felt different. Less accidental. More charged. He took the book and, with an easy reach, slid it into place on the shelf. I started to climb down, and his hand remained on my back until my feet were firmly on the floor. When I turned to face him, he was standing very close. I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. His eyes were dark and serious, and they were searching my face for something. "You need to be more careful, Leo," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "I will," I promised. He didn't step back. His hand, which had dropped from my back, came up to brush a speck of dust from my cheek. His thumb grazed my skin, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver down my spine. The air crackled between us. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own frantic breathing. This is it, I thought. This is the moment. But then, he seemed to catch himself. He dropped his hand and took a half-step back, putting a small but significant distance between us. The intensity in his eyes was replaced by a familiar, guarded calm. I'll be in my study," he said, his voice a little rough. "Let me know if you need help with any more of the heavy ones." He turned and walked out of the library, leaving me standing there, my skin still tingling where he had touched me. My heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of my ribs. The ambiguity was killing me. The touch had felt meaningful, purposeful, but his retreat was just as clear. He was my employer. He was maintaining a boundary. Or was he? I spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog, my thoughts circling back to that one moment. The solid weight of his hand on my back. The brief, gentle caress on my cheek. I replayed it over and over, analyzing it from every angle. Was it just a protective instinct? A simple, kind gesture? Or was it something more? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I was hoping it was more. I was beginning to feel something for this quiet, steady man. Something that went far beyond gratitude for a job. It was a deep, unsettling attraction that was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. I was falling for Julian Croft, and I had no idea what to do about it. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of tension. It was a quiet, humming energy that lived just beneath the surface of our polite interactions. We were both acutely aware of the invisible line between us, and we were both meticulously careful not to cross it. Yet, the awareness itself was a kind of intimacy. We fell into a deeper rhythm. Sometimes, we would work in the library together for an hour or two in the afternoons. He would sit in one of the leather armchairs, ostensibly reading, but I would often look up and find him watching me, a soft, contemplative expression on his face. When our eyes met, he would give me a small, slow smile, and a warmth would bloom in my chest, chasing away the ever-present chill I used to carry. One rainy Friday, we were faced with a new challenge. A large, antique map chest needed to be moved from one side of the room to the other. It was too heavy for one person. "We'll have to do this together," Julian said, rolling up the sleeves of his sweater. It was the first time we'd undertaken a significant task as a team, as equals. "You take that side," he directed, his voice calm and sure. "On 3, we lift. Ready? 1, 2, 3" we lifted in unison. The chest was heavy and awkward, and we had to shuffle sideways to move it across the room. Our shoulders bumped. Our arms brushed. We moved in a clumsy, intimate dance, our breathing synchronized with the effort. "A little more to the left," he grunted, his face taut with exertion. Okay, got it, I replied, adjusting my grip. We finally lowered it into place with a heavy thud. We both stood up straight, breathing heavily, a thin sheen of sweat on our brows. We were standing close, our bodies angled toward each other, enclosed in the shared space of our accomplishment. We make a good team, I said, a smile touching my lips before I could stop it. Julian looked at me, a genuine, unguarded smile spreading across his face. Yes, he said, his voice warm and a little breathless. We do. The moment stretched, full of unspoken words. The rain drummed against the window panes, isolating us in our own little world. He didn't look away. For the first time, he let me see the undisguised warmth in his eyes. It was a look of pure, unadulterated affection. Later that evening, as I was packing up to leave, he stopped me at the door. Leo, he said, his tone serious. I turned, my heart giving a nervous little flutter. Yes. He seemed to be struggling for words, a rare occurrence for him. He ran a hand through his hair. I want to make sure you're still comfortable with this arrangement. With working here, in my home. The question was so unexpected, so deeply considerate, that it caught me off guard. He was worried about me. He was worried that the lines were blurring, and that I might feel trapped or pressured. He was, once again, handing me the power, giving me an out. It was a moment of profound vulnerability on his part. He was admitting his awareness of the tension between us, and in doing so, he was risking my retreat. He was showing me his own fear, the fear of being perceived as coercive, of taking advantage of the situation. This is my chance, I thought. I can either run from this, or I can step toward it. I took a deep breath. Julian, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I have never felt more comfortable or more seen than I do when I'm here. The relief that washed over his face was so palpable, it was almost a physical thing. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Good, he said, his voice thick with emotion. That's very good to hear. He held my gaze for a long moment, and in his eyes, I saw not just relief, but a deep, resonant yearning that mirrored my own. The unspoken had finally been acknowledged, not with a clumsy confession, but with a quiet exchange of truth and reassurance. The foundation between us had settled, becoming something solid and real. The weekend was torture. Away from the quiet refuge of his house, my own small, cold apartment felt more like a prison than ever. I replayed our conversation, his look of relief, 100 times. The dynamic had shifted. We had both acknowledged the delicate thing growing between us, and neither of us had run away. Now, the question was, what happened next? Monday morning, I was a bundle of nerves. I dressed with more care than usual, choosing my newest pair of jeans and a sweater that wasn't pilled. As I walked up the long drive to his house, I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. But something had happened in town over the weekend. The woman who ran the local bakery, a notorious gossip named Martha, had seen me leaving Julian's house on Friday evening, and she had apparently shared her observations with half the town. When I stopped at the small market to grab a bottle of water before my walk up the hill, the man behind the counter, who usually just grunted at me, gave me a strange, knowing smirk. Moving up in the world, are we, Leo? He asked, his tone slick with insinuation. I felt my face burn. I just paid for my water and left without a word, but the damage was done. My private world, the safe bubble I had built with Julian, had been punctured. The outside world, with its judgments and assumptions, was starting to press in. I was late getting to Julian's house, my mind churning with anger and embarrassment. I was so lost in thought that I nearly missed the turn onto his driveway. I hurried up the path, my cheeks flushed, my chest tight. I reached for the doorknob, but the door swung open before my hand made contact. Julian was standing there, his expression tight, a muscle working in his jaw. He must have seen me coming from the window. You're late, he said. The words were flat, devoid of their usual warmth. My heart sank. He was angry. I'm so sorry. I started, fumbling for an excuse. The bus was slow, and I had to stop at the. He cut me off, not by speaking, but by moving. He reached out, his fingers curling around my belt loop, and gently but firmly pulled me inside. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing us in, sealing the world out. He didn't let go. His hand was a warm, solid anchor at my hip. He looked down at me, his eyes dark and intense. That's not what I mean, he said, his voice a low, rough growl that vibrated through me. "You're late." To me, I stared up at him, my mind struggling to catch up. This wasn't anger. It was something else. Something raw and urgent. He wasn't talking about the time on the clock. He was talking about us. About the weeks of circling each other, of unspoken feelings and careful boundaries. He was talking about the space between us that had suddenly become unbearable. He saw the dawning understanding in my eyes. His expression softened, the hard lines around his mouth easing. "I heard what they're saying in town," he said quietly. "I went to get the paper this morning. Martha from the bakery was informative." "Oh," I whispered, the shame washing over me again. "Leo, look at me." His voice was firm but gentle. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Does what they think matter to you?" It was a direct question. A test. He was asking me to choose. The world's perception or this. Us. "No," I said, and the word came out with a surprising amount of force. "No, it doesn't." A slow smile touched his lips. "Good," he murmured. "Because it doesn't matter to me either. The only thing that matters is what you feel. What you want." His thumb stroked the worn denim at my hip, a small, possessive gesture that made my breath catch. The air was thick with everything we hadn't said. The silence stretched, a taut wire of anticipation. He was waiting for me to make the next move, to close the final distance. He was, as always, giving me the control. And in that moment, I knew I was done being cautious. I was done being afraid. I am here, now, in the warmth of his house, with the solid weight of his hand on my hip. The world outside, with its cold judgments, feels a million miles away. All that exists is the space between us, a space filled with a question that has been hanging in the air for weeks. His eyes are searching mine, asking for permission, for a clear and undeniable signal. He has built this bridge between us, piece by piece, with patience and respect. But he will not cross it alone. I have to meet him in the middle. My own hand comes up, slowly, hesitantly, and rests on his chest. I can feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart beneath my palm. It's a strong, reassuring rhythm. The rhythm of home. "Julian," I whisper, my voice barely audible. He says nothing, but his eyes soften, giving me all the encouragement I need. "I want this," I say, and the words are the truest I have ever spoken. "I want you." The last of the tension leaves his body in a quiet exhale. It's a sound of profound relief, of a long-held breath finally released. His hand leaves my belt loop and comes up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking gently along my cheekbone. His skin is warm, a little rough, and the touch is exquisitely tender. "I have wanted you, Leo," he confesses, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tries to hide. "From the first day you smiled at me over the counter at the coffee shop. But I couldn't, not when the power was so imbalanced. I had to wait. I had to be sure it was your choice." His honesty is a gift, clearing away the last of my lingering fears. He saw me, not as a project or an employee, but as a person. He waited, not out of indifference, but out of respect. He leans down, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I don't. I rise on my toes, meeting him, closing that last, infinitesimal gap between us. His lips meet mine. It's not a kiss of frantic passion or desperate need. It's a kiss of arrival. It's slow and soft and breathtakingly gentle. It's a question and an answer all at once. It tastes of coffee and a quiet, patient certainty. It feels like coming home. My fingers curl into the soft fabric of his sweater, holding on as if he's the only solid thing in a spinning world. His other arm wraps around my waist, pulling me flush against him, holding me securely. I melt into his embrace, a lifetime of guardedness and isolation dissolving in the steady warmth of his body. When we finally break apart, it's only by an inch. He rests his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. His eyes are closed, a look of serene peace on his face. "Right?" he murmurs, his voice a low vibration against my skin. That felt right. "Yes, I agree," my own voice shaky with the force of my emotions. It did. We stand there for a long time, wrapped in a comfortable silence, just breathing each other in. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall is the only sound, measuring out the first moments of our new reality. It is a beginning, quiet and profound, in the warm, safe stillness of his house. The next morning, I woke up in a room I didn't recognize. Sunlight streamed through a large window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The sheets were soft, the thread count ridiculously high, and they smelled faintly of cedar in him. I was in Julian's guest room. After the kiss, things had been gentle. He had made us dinner, and we had eaten at the kitchen table, our knees occasionally bumping underneath. The conversation was easy, natural. We talked about books and music and our childhoods. It felt less like a first date and more like a conversation that had been waiting for years to happen. When it grew late, he had shown me to the guest room. "I want to do this right, Leo," he had said, his hand lingering on my arm at the doorway. "Slowly. I don't want you to ever feel pressured or rushed." And I had been so overwhelmed with gratitude for his thoughtfulness that I could only nod, my throat tight with emotion. But now, in the bright light of morning, a familiar unease began to creep in. The house was silent. Was he awake? Was he regretting it? The reality of our situation came crashing back down. He was still Julian Croft, my wealthy employer. And I was still Leo, the guy who couldn't afford to fix his own heat. The kiss hadn't magically erased that disparity. If anything, it had made it more complicated. I swung my legs out of bed and padded quietly to the door, cracking it open. The smell of coffee was a welcome, familiar scent. I followed it down the hall to the kitchen. Julian was standing at the counter, his back to me, wearing the same jeans and a soft gray t-shirt. He was pouring 2 mugs of coffee. He seemed to sense my presence, because he turned, a small, gentle smile on his face. "Morning," he said, his voice a little rough with sleep. "I was just about to bring you a cup." The simple domesticity of the scene, the easy way he said it, calmed some of my anxiety. But not all of it. "Morning," I replied, my voice quiet. I hovered in the doorway, unsure of the new etiquette between us. He seemed to read my uncertainty. He set the mugs down and walked over to me. He didn't touch me, but stood a respectful distance away. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I had to be honest. "I'm a little overwhelmed," I admitted. "This is all very new." He nodded, his expression full of understanding. "I know, and I don't want to add to that. Which is why we need to talk about the practical side of things." He gestured to the kitchen table, and we sat down opposite each other, the 2 coffee mugs between us like a centerpiece. "First," he said, his tone businesslike but not cold, "the library. The job is nearly finished. You've done incredible work." He pushed an envelope across the table. "This is your final payment, plus a bonus for finishing ahead of schedule. Your employment with me, on that project, is officially over." I stared at the envelope. It felt like a dismissal, a clean break. My heart stuttered. He must have seen the flicker of panic in my eyes, because he quickly continued. "Leo, this is not me pushing you away. This is me trying to fix the imbalance between us. I can't. I don't want to be your employer anymore." He paused, taking a deep breath. "What I want is to be the man who takes you to dinner. The man who gets to kiss you again. But for that to happen, you need to be completely free. Your finances can't be tied to my affection. Your independence is not negotiable." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. He wasn't ending things. He was trying to start them properly. He was meticulously dismantling the power structure that had always stood between us, so that we could meet as equals. Relief washed through me, so potent it made me dizzy. "Oh," I said softly. I understand. I hope you do," he said, his gaze earnest. "The money in that envelope is yours, earned and deserved. It's enough to fix your heat, pay your rent for months, and give you a cushion. It gives you the freedom to walk away from me, right now, with no strings attached. If that's what you want." He was offering me an exit ramp, clean and clear. He was giving me the ultimate choice. I looked from the envelope to his face, at the quiet strength and integrity etched there. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that walking away was the last thing on earth I wanted to do. I pushed the envelope back across the table toward him. "I don't want it," I said. He frowned, confused. "Leo, you earned it, I know," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "And I'll take it. But not right now. Right now, I want you to answer a question for me. Anything," he said. Would you like to have breakfast with me?" I asked, a small smile playing on my lips. As not my employer? The confusion on his face melted away, replaced by a smile so bright and genuine it transformed his entire expression. "Leo," he said, his voice full of warmth. "I would love that." A week later, we walked into town together. It was our first public outing, our first test. We were going to the small, independent bookstore at the end of Main Street. It felt like a deliberate choice, a neutral ground that was centered on a shared love. As we walked, I was hyper-aware of the space between us. I wanted to reach out and take his hand, but I was nervous. The memory of the market owner's snide comment was still fresh. As if he could read my mind, Julian's hand brushed against mine. It wasn't an accident. It was an invitation. I hesitated for only a second before my fingers laced with his. His hand was large and warm, and it enveloped mine in a grip that was both gentle and possessive. It felt right. We passed the bakery. I saw Martha through the window, her eyes widening as she saw our joined hands. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach, but Julian gave my hand a small, reassuring squeeze. He didn't falter. He just looked straight ahead, his chin held high. Then, he turned his head and gave me a small, private smile. In that moment, I knew we would be okay. Her opinion, the town's opinion, it was all just noise. The only thing that mattered was the solid warmth of his hand in mine. We were navigating it together. Inside the bookstore, the familiar scent of paper and ink enveloped us. We separated, browsing in our own sections, but I was always aware of where he was in the cozy, cluttered space. I'd catch his eye over the top of a bookshelf, and we'd exchange a silent smile. I found a collection of poems by an author I loved and took it to the counter. Julian met me there, a thick biography in his hand. As the owner rang us up, Julian's arm came to rest lightly around my shoulders. It was a simple, casual gesture of affection, but in the bright light of the bookstore, it felt like a declaration. It was a quiet statement that we were together, and we were not ashamed. We stepped back out into the crisp autumn air, our books in a paper bag, our hands once again linked. The world felt different. Brighter. I felt different. Steadier. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for so long had finally, blessedly, uncoiled. That night, back at his house, we sat in the leather armchairs in front of a crackling fire in the library. The room that had once been my workplace now felt like our shared sanctuary. The cataloging was done. The books were in order, but the room was still alive with the memory of how we had found each other. "I have a proposal for you," Julian said, his voice serious as he looked into the flames. My heart did a familiar nervous skip. He turned to me, his expression soft. "It's not a job. It's just an idea," he paused. "Your apartment lease is up next month, isn't it?" I nodded, surprised he remembered me mentioning it weeks ago. "This house is too big for one person," he said. "It's too quiet. I was wondering if you would consider moving in here with me." He rushed to continue, as if he was afraid of my answer. "You'd have your own space, of course, the entire guest wing, and we would draw up an agreement. You'd pay a fair, proportional rent. This wouldn't be me keeping you. It would be us building a home together, but only if you want to. There is no pressure." He was, as always, meticulously careful to preserve my independence, to make sure we were partners. He wasn't offering to solve my problems. He was offering to share his life. I looked around the beautiful, firelit room. I looked at this kind, steady, honorable man who had seen me, truly seen me, and had patiently waited for me to be ready. "You don't need a rental agreement, Julian," I said softly. "Leo, I insist. It's important that we trust each other," I interrupted gently. "And I trust you." I reached across the space between our chairs and took his hand. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and sure. "I'll move in with you." The choice was conscious, deliberate, and entirely my own. We would proceed with care, with steadiness, with the same respect that had been the foundation of our relationship from the very beginning. The next Saturday was moving day. Julian insisted on helping, despite my protest that I only had a few boxes of books and clothes. He showed up at my old apartment in his comfortable jeans and a faded university sweatshirt, looking nothing like a millionaire property owner. He looked around the small, cold space, his gaze lingering on the broken radiator. He didn't say anything pitying. He just picked up the heaviest box of books and said, "All right, let's get you home." The word hung in the air. Home. An hour later, my few possessions were stacked in the guest wing of his house. It didn't look like much in the large, airy rooms, but it was a start. It was my corner of this new world we were building. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon. I walked into the kitchen, and Julian was at the stove, a spatula in his hand. He was humming softly to himself. He turned and smiled at me, a lazy, happy smile. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's ready." I poured myself a mug and leaned against the counter, just watching him. The morning sun streamed into the kitchen. The room was warm, and the man I was falling in love with was making me breakfast. It was a scene of such simple, quiet intimacy that it brought a lump to my throat. This wasn't a spectacle. It was just life. It felt like an arrival. We ate at the kitchen table, the silence comfortable and easy. After, we took our coffee out to the stone patio at the back of the house. The sun was just starting to climb over the wooded hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. We sat side by side in companionable silence, watching the world wake up. I thought back to those mornings in my cold apartment, gulping down coffee just for the fleeting warmth. I thought about the loneliness, the feeling of being stuck, of being invisible. It felt like a lifetime ago. I glanced at Julian. He was looking at the sunrise, a peaceful, contented expression on his face. He felt my gaze and turned to me, his eyes full of a quiet, steady love. He had used his resources not to control me, but to create a space where I could be safe. He had used his patience not to wear me down, but to give me time to find my own footing. His age and his wealth were part of our story, the context that had brought us together, but they were not the foundation of it. The foundation was this: the quiet respect, the shared sunrise, the mutual, conscious choice to be here, together. He reached over and took my hand, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. I was no longer afraid. I was home. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.